What's going on, everyone? So we got a couple of polls here released recently by Gallup that I thought would be worth diving into, worth sharing. I'll put a link to both of these in the description below so you can check them out. The first one that we're going to dive right into here is a poll of Americans' view of the war in Ukraine. And to get right into it, it says 31% of U.S. adults interviewed for this survey support ending the conflict quickly, even if that allows Russia to keep territory. Now, these polls are all super high level, right? So they're not getting down into the nitty gritty of, Crimea, for instance, although it will kind of hit on Crimea here in a minute. So very high level, 31% supports ending the conflict while allowing Russia to keep territory. As we sit here at the end of October, that probably means some of the annexed territory in the eastern part of the country is what they have in mind. 66% or two-thirds of respondents support Ukraine reclaiming territory, even if it's a prolonged conflict. I don't think that's too shocking. I expected more in that category than ending it soon and giving territory to Russia, but it's about two-thirds to one-third. And as you dig down this poll and the next one, a bunch of demographic data you can dive into as well and kind of pick apart. The other question for Americans was about aid. And again, very high level. It doesn't break out, or it says support, it doesn't even say aid, but it doesn't break out the difference between military and humanitarian, financial, any of those things, right? So it's very, very broad. 24% of Americans say that we are giving too much support to Ukraine, and 74% say we're either not giving enough or we're giving the right amount. Specifically, it's what 38% says not enough, 36% says the right amount. That feels about right. Just in chatting with folks about the conflict, I would have put it probably around 80% saying we're doing enough or not enough, and 20% or less probably saying we're doing too much. So it it fits the common sense test, I guess, the gut check for what I would have guessed there. Again, more demographic data to dive on through with this one. But moving on to the polls of Ukrainian citizens in Ukraine and Gallup in the articles, if you want to take a look, they talk about interviewing Ukrainians that are in some of the occupied territories. So they tried at least to blanket as much of the country as they could. This one's talking about the future of the war with Russia should Ukraine continue fighting. And 70% of Ukrainian respondents said they should continue fighting with Russia until they win the war. Compare that with 26% that says they should seek negotiations as soon as possible. I've seen a couple polls released recently, and polls are always tricky, right? There's so many variables to these. But I think another one I saw was even more, like 80, 85% supported continuing the war. Now, something we'll get into here on the next slide is talking about how support for the war is greater the further you move from the front lines. So in the East, it is 56% supports continuing the war, 58% in the South. In Kyiv, it's 83%. In the West, 82%. Central part of the country, 78%. And the North, 75%. This is what that map looks like. I know it's a little hard to see on the screen, but again, link in the description. You can check it out. There's like too much to take away from this to really make a solid analysis. On the one hand, you could say people on the front lines are more likely to want the war to end because their homes are destroyed. They're in the middle of a war. They can't live their lives. You could just as easily say the pro-Ukraine supporters in some of those parts of the country aren't there anymore. They probably fled the battlefields if at all possible. So, I feel like you could make too many arguments about why this is the case. It's just something to consider at this point. Last one up here, Ukrainian definition of victory in the war with Russia. And I thought this was interesting. 91% of Ukrainians that answered this poll said the war is won when all territory lost between 2014 and now is regained, including Crimea. 5% when all territory lost in this most recent invasion since February 2022 is regained, and 4% everything regained since 2014 except for Crimea. I expected that number, that top number, this 91%, to be the greatest, but I didn't think that it was going to be 91% of all respondents. That's interesting and just something to keep in mind as this conflict, hopefully at some point, starts to near a close, whether it's on the battlefield or at the negotiating table. That tells us something. It tells us potentially goals of the Ukrainian military. It tells us potential goals or ideas or hopes at the negotiating table. I would have probably put that number closer to 70%, but 91% is overwhelming Ukrainian support for taking back everything, including Crimea. But again, the links to both of these polls are in the video description below. If you want to check them out, definitely worth kind of the summaries that are in there. Some interesting points, but that'll do it for now. We'll see y'all next time.